All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica McCoubry, and I'm with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Today, we're going to be talking about the science of tree frogs. So thanks for joining us today. Tree frogs are kind of a unique species. We don't really think of tree frogs when we think of Nebraska. Nebraska is more of a prairie state. So for us to think trees, sometimes that's not what we want for a prairie. But we do have hardwood forests, and we do have those oak savannas up in northeast Nebraska and also in kind of that southeast corner of Nebraska as well. So today we're going to be talking about tree frogs, and we only have one species of tree frog in Nebraska, which is the Cope's gray tree frog. So we're going to be talking about them today, but we're also going to kind of mix in a little bit about just general biology of tree frogs. And then I always think it's interesting to talk about other species in the world. So we'll talk just a few species, but we will really focus on that Cope's gray tree frog since I'm in Nebraska and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we'll go ahead and get started. Sorry, just so if everyone is familiar with this, I hope that you guys have questions and I hope that you have comments. Just please make sure that they are relevant to what we're talking about and that we are being kind to everyone in the chat. And so if you don't, we will be able to remove you from this program. I also want to tell people that I am by no means a tree frog expert. I am a reptile person and I do a lot of research for these programs. I'm also a science communicator, so I'm an expert in science communication. But if you have questions for me about things that I cannot answer, I will find someone that can answer those for you and I will get back to you. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk, I always like to talk a little bit about kind of like the evolutionary history of what we're talking about today, if it's applicable. So, I thought we could kind of talk a little bit about these really unique species, tree frogs, and just kind of frogs in general, kind of where they came from. There's a lot of misconceptions about how they came about and their history. So let's go ahead and kind of dive into it. So kind of the evolution of a frog. So when we think of just a frog, whether that is a tree frog or whether that is a leopard frog or a bullfrog or whatever we're talking about. So since they first appeared, frogs have kind of evolved to live in a very wide range of environment. So when we think about the rainforest, the pond here in Nebraska or in Lincoln, they live in an urban setting. They can live in the higher elevations. There's lots of different places that frogs can live. So overall in the entire world, there's about 7,635 species when we look worldwide. Nebraska has 11 species of frogs and toads. So we have a very small subset of those populations of frogs, but still population. There was this really unique study done that wasn't too long ago where they wanted to really understand this idea of frog evolution and how it came to be and where they fit within the line. So they took genetic data from 5,242 different species of frogs, which represents about 68% of all known species. So this is huge. It's a lot of species, and that's a lot of genetic data. It's not every single species, but it is a ton that we are able to grab that information from. And basically, they created this comprehensive tree of life for amphibians. So this study had never been done before to this degree. There was another study done that was similar to it, but they only took the genetic data of 3,000 species, and this was quite a bit more. So they took all this information and they really wanted to figure out where frogs kind of fall in the line. So there were some interesting revelations to this species or this study. Previous estimates suggested that frogs kind of first appeared in this evolutionary line about 215 million years ago, which was kind of towards the end of the Triassic period. This is basically when dinosaurs and mammals were also first evolving. And so this new tree, this comprehensive study that these researchers did, it gave life to kind of where the new dates where frogs may not have appeared until about 180 million years ago instead of that 215. This would have been the start of the Jurassic period. So this new information was given to us based on that study, and that's very different than what scientists had previously thought of when frogs kind of evolved. So we know that they're also very adaptable. So the evolution of the three types of amphibians, frogs, Toads are kind of in the same thing. I know they're different, but they kind of group them together, frogs and toads. And then you also have salamanders and this Sicilian. So Sicilian, we don't have any. They're more like a neotropical species, South America, Central America. They almost look like a worm, but they are indeed an amphibian. So we have Sicilians, frogs, toads, and then salamanders. So those three groups of amphibians, how they've evolved over time and how they've kind of come to be together has really been a hot debate between a lot of scientists and evolutionary biologists. So there's no definitive answer. There's a lot of theories, but no definitive answer. So looking at fossil evidence, the earliest known true frogs that fall into what's called the Anuran lineage, they all lived in the early Jurassic period. So the early ancestors of frogs were amphibians, much like we have today. They have features similar to what our animals have today. They had gills, they had webbed feet, very similar to like modern salamanders. So they almost looked more like those true frogs, looked more like salamanders at the time, but somehow over time, they were able to change into those three lineages that we see today. So there was this thing called a proto-frog. It's the earliest known proto-frog fossil, and it dates back to the early Triassic period, which was around 250 million years ago. And this one is considered a key ancestor. So these earliest true frogs kind of emerged around the late Jurassic period, around 180 to 215 million years ago. Those are true frogs, but there was something before that, what's called that proto-frog. So which was very, very early compared to this time period. So there's a lot of spaces and there's a lot of gaps, and it's really hard to find fossils of frogs because they're very kind of fragile. Their skin is very fragile, their bones are really fragile, so it's hard just to find those missing links and those kind of key gaps to those different types of animals around. So here's that proto-frog, so kind of that first frog that we see here. On the left, you will see the fossil actually for it, the bones, and you can kind of see how the spinal column goes down. You can kind of see there's two like lines at the bottom that kind of jut out to the side. Those are the back legs. So it kind of looks similar to a frog that we have today. But when you look at the artist rendition on the right, it looks very different. So they almost have a little bit more of a salamander-shaped head. They have this weird tail that's still there. So again, this was kind of the first like artist rendition of a proto-frog, that really key ancestor. All right, so after frogs evolved, they kind of just diversified. So there's a lot of new research that suggests that frogs diversified into this thousands of different species a lot faster than we previously thought. And by we, I mean scientists. So potentially linked to the extinction of the dinosaurs. So they're thinking that once the dinosaurs kind of died out, frogs were like, heck yes, this is our chance. And so they basically like diversified. And so some studies even suggest that during that KPG extinction, which if you're not familiar with it, it's the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. This was this huge extinction event about 66 million years ago, kind of marking the end of the Mesozoic era and then moving on to that Cenozoic period. It was the time basically everyone knows is the extinction of the dinosaurs, of the non-avian dinosaurs. So during that time, it played a huge pivotal role in kind of shaping the current diversity and especially that geographic distribution of our modern frogs. All right, so that was like a very quick, 300 million year evolutionary history of frogs. But I always like to kind of have that in the back of my mind when I move on to something new and when I'm learning about these animals. So we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about like the physical description of frogs and then kind of specifically go into tree frogs. All right, so frogs. I'm sure everyone has seen a frog before. You kind of know what they look like. But frogs and toads, they make up this largest group of amphibians. So when we talk about amphibians, it's the amphibians, frogs and toads, salamanders and caecilians. The frogs and toads make up the largest group and also the most diverse group. So when we talk about the order It's a nura. So when we say anurans, we're talking about frogs. So substantially outnumbers the other two orders, like I mentioned, the caudata, which is those salamanders, and the gymnophonia, which are the caecilians. So there's about 7,486 species of frogs out of 8,478 species of amphibians. So clearly they outweigh and outnumber the different types of other animals. And not only are they one of the most diverse groups of amphibians, they're also one of the most diverse groups of animals, period. So when we think about mammals, when we think about birds are a little bad example. There's tons of different types of birds, obviously lots of different types of insects, but when we look at fish and we look at reptiles, and those amphibians are right up there with them. So they have quite a few different types of species. So here's a cool video. I just wanted to start out with a video of a frog. I know there's not a lot of sound on your end, but just looking at how they move, their eyes, their back legs. This is a very neat frog. It's an Amazon leaf frog. There's not a ton of videos that we have of native frogs, but I wanted just to show you kind of how they move, how they look, how their body is shaped. They almost look like they wouldn't have bones, but they do. They are vertebrate animals, just like reptiles are, just like fish are. Their body's just shaped a little differently. So we talked about how they're diverse. They come in tons of different shapes, colors, and sizes. Everything from the largest frog, which is known as the Goliath frog. It is from Cameroon. It can grow to be about a foot or a little longer, so 12 inches. That is a huge frog, and weighs about 7.3 pounds. And then the smallest frog to be known is also the smallest known vertebrate on Earth, which is about 0.3 inches long, very, very tiny, and they're found in New Guinea. So huge diversity when we talk about those animals. All right, so true frogs, what are they? So they are these tailless amphibians. So we know from school that they go through a process called metamorphosis, which we'll talk about here in a little bit later, which just means change. So these animals, they're born with tails, they hatch out of an egg, they look like a tadpole, and then as they change over time, they will absorb that tail, they'll kind of change their body shape, they'll grow the legs, but they don't have tails, and they belong to this order of true frogs known as Anura or Anurans, you may have heard. It's kind of limited, but when we say true frogs within this order, you use sometimes Ranidae, or you might hear someone say that. But that's the family within the order of the frogs, of the Anurans. So broadly, when we talk about frogs, people kind of put together frogs and toads. They're very different, but broadly the word frog is used to kind of distinguish the smooth skinned, which is like this picture that you see here. They leap, they don't hop. There's a different movement for frogs versus toads. Toads are a little bit more squatty. They're warty. They have the bumps on their skin. They hop, they don't leap. And then those are kind of known as toads. So very, very different. All right, so what are they? We talked about when they become a adult, they have these like, I'm so sorry. They have these like protruding eyes. So it looks like their eyes are popping out of their head. Fun fact, they also swallow with their eyeballs. We'll talk about that later. But they don't have a tail. They are very strong webbed hind feet that they're used for adapting. Over time, they leap and they even swim. Some of them climb, like our tree frogs. They also have this smooth, moist skin. So one of the big differences between telling a frog versus a toad is that frogs are going to have smooth, slimy skin on them. Predominantly, they're going to be aquatic, which means they live in the water. Some can live on land, some can live in burrows, and some can even live in trees. With frogs and toads, same thing. The males are generally smaller than the females. Sometimes with reptiles and amphibians, a lot of times with birds, that's the same thing. Females are going to be generally larger than the males. Some species have poisonous skin, some do not. Some species rely on camouflage, some species change color. So there's just a lot of diversity when we talk about frogs. All right, so let's get into our Cope's gray tree frog because we're here to talk about tree frogs today. So we're going to be seeing the Hyla chrysosceles is going to be our Cope's gray tree frog. It is the species that is found in Nebraska. Coincidentally enough, there's also a gray tree frog and there's the Cope's gray tree frog. When you have the two together, we only have the Cope's gray tree frog, but the gray tree frog and the Cope's, they usually overlap in their range. We don't have the gray, we just have the Cope's gray, but they look almost indistinguishable from each other. They're very difficult to tell apart. You can't really by just looking at them. You have to go through their chromosome numbers, and also their calls are going to be different. But both species are found in eastern North America. And like I mentioned, basically it's going to be their advertisement calls. If you have those two species together, they look very similar, but you have to listen for their calls. Um, Gray tree frogs also tend to have a little bit more of a northern distribution than the Cope's gray tree frog. So there's slight differences, but physically they look the same. Okay, so their appearance, they don't have warts, but if you look closely at their skin, it is not like that perfectly smooth, waxy look like a normal rainforest tree frog. They have kind of this granular skin. They have these adhesive pads, as you can see on the picture here. Every single one of their toes, they have these tiny little sticky pads on them. The colors are also not always gray. So even though they're called the gray tree frog or the Cope's gray tree frog, they're not always gray. Sometimes they could be green. Sometimes they could be green gray. Sometimes they could be brown. Sometimes they could be dark brown. It kind of just depends on their feeling. So frogs will change color depending on the temperature, depending on the humidity, depending on their feeling, or their stress levels is mostly what I'm trying to get at. So it's not always going to be gray when you see them. So if you see a green tree frog in Nebraska, it's not a new species. It's just that that frog has changed color. So except for very few kind of light individuals, like colored individuals, the back usually has a few large, dark, irregular blotches on them. That's a great way to identify them. They are the only tree frog species in Nebraska, but if you see them sitting on the ground, it's a good way to identify them. And then they always have this large white or gray spot kind of just below their eye. Their belly is usually whitish to a cream color. And then their area inside their hind legs, if you have them on their back and you look at their belly, the inside of their hind legs is kind of this orangish yellow, and they have like a light gray or black mottling appearance. This is thought to confuse predators. So between the Cope's gray tree frog and the gray tree frog, the Cope's gray tree frog also tends to be slightly smaller. So if you have the two together, one's slightly smaller, it is probably the Cope's, but it's very hard to tell, like if you just look at them. All right, so their skin. We did talk about their skin is going to be moist and smooth because they're frogs, but it's not that silky smooth appearance that you would see in like a normal rainforest tree frog. They're going to have that granular skin on them. It almost looks a little rough. So it's not as smooth as other tree frog species. It's not as warty or bumpy as toads, but it's kind of in that middle. We talked about their color changing. They can change from green or brown to almost even white. I've seen a lot of really light colored individuals. It kind of just depends on their changing is depending on their temperature or the activity that they're doing. In young animals, this happens around every couple weeks or so. That they're going to shed their skin. So sometimes that could also be different depending on the color, depending on their age and how many times they've shed their skin also. And then one of the cool things, I think it's cool, is frogs will actually eat their skin, which sounds absolutely disgusting, but there's a reason for it. So frogs will eat their skin when they shed it. They do not shed in pieces. They usually shed in one whole big clump. So there is actually behavior known as this. Frogs and toads will do this. But basically there's two reasons for this. One is there's still nutrients left in their skin. So when they shed it, basically they pop it over their head and then they use their front feet to kind of push it into their mouth and then they eat it. Another reason is that they don't want to leave traces behind that could alert predators that they have been there. So they want to make sure that they don't smell, they don't leave chemical cues. They want to make sure that when they leave a place, they leave a place. So other animals can't track them down. So we talked about this helps them recycle those nutrients, but it all depends how often they shed. So young animals will shed their skin around every couple weeks or so. As the frog ages, it will go slower because they're not growing as fast. So older frogs will do this maybe 4 to 5 times a year. And when we say older frogs, they don't live very long. They live maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years is a very, very long time to live for a frog or a tree frog. So as they get older, they will shed their skin less and less. All right, so changing color. So tree frogs use special color changing pigment cells known as chromatophores. So these help to camouflage the animal kind of by matching it to its environment, and it also helps to regulate their body temperature. Color changing is to hide from predators, but it also, like I mentioned, helps control their body temperature. And also some colors absorb more or less light, so they can cool themselves down or warm themselves up if needed. So oftentimes you will see animals different color in the morning versus at night, or earlier in the season versus later in the season. Most frogs, they cannot completely change the color of their skin, but instead they can change the shade. They can be lighter, they could be darker. Some tree frogs can completely change. Dennis Ferraro is the kind of the state herpetologist here for Nebraska, for the university. He has a couple tree frogs. I've seen them gray, and then the next time I go, they're green. We have three tree frogs in our office. I've never seen them be green, but I've seen them be really dark brown. I've seen them be kind of a lighter gray, but I've just never seen that green. They're more the shade changing frogs, I think. So, all right. So here's just kind of showing the really cool ability to camouflage in these animals. So let's see if you can find this frog here. Obviously, it's moving, it's breathing, you can see it, but just showcasing how well tree frogs are able to hide. So some tree frog species want to stick out. Some species are really brightly colored. Usually in the animal kingdom, that means that they taste bad, they're poisonous, they're dangerous, something like that. So animals know kind of leave them alone. Other animals want to camouflage, so they want to be invisible in their surroundings. The Cope's gray tree frog is the one that wants to be invisible in their surroundings. So whether that is to hide from a predator, but it also helps them sneak up on other animals to eat them as well. So all right, so they have these huge eyes. One of the things about all frogs, not just tree frogs, they have these huge eyes that like bug out of their head. So they stick out for a reason. This is so that they can see behind them and to the sides without having to turn their head around. So this is a really cool thing that they are able to do. Think of almost like an owl. An owl has to turn its head to see because its eyes are so big it can't move. It's kind of like the opposite for a frog. So their eyes are so big, they don't have to move around. And these guys, they're able to turn the heads to the sides or not turn their heads so they can see. Their eyes are also set very far apart from each other and they protrude out of their head. They almost have a 360-degree view of their surroundings, not quite, but they can also see underwater. They have this really neat third eyelid known as the nictitating membrane, so that they can keep their eyes open underwater, but they can kind of put that membrane down. They're almost like built-in goggles, so they don't get stuff in their eye and they can still see underwater. So quite a few animals in the animal kingdom have a nictitating membrane, even when they're not swimming. So crocodiles are one. Badgers actually have it as well. They will kind of use that nictitating membrane when they're digging so they don't get dirt in their eyes. So it's kind of like a shield to protect their eyes. So there's many uses in the animal kingdom. Frogs are one of those animals that do have them. Um, All right, they also have sticky feet. So one of the reasons that tree frogs are tree frogs is because they can climb up trees or windows or buildings or grass or something like that. So every single tree frog species is able to climb, have sticky feet. So they found that they have these fluid-filled adhesive toe pads on tree frogs that they're able to grip and to climb surfaces. So each pad, each circle, individual toe on the circle adheres to a surface by secreting water fluid, and then they generate these capillary forces that results in like this very thin layer between the pad and the surface that sticks. So when surfaces aren't smooth, it doesn't allow for that adhesion. Frogs will then use their long limbs to kind of grip around the object. So for instance, when our animals go to climb in our tank, the glass is very smooth. They are able to climb up that no problem. However, one of the things is when we spray it down or the mister comes on, it gets really wet in there, and they sometimes have a little trouble gripping onto the plants or the tree branches. It also depends on the shape of the thing that they're trying to climb. So if it's a vertical surface, is it a tiny little branch where they can't quite get their feet around? So it kind of depends on the surfaces. So the gripping and the clamping technique kind of relies on the friction between the digits or the other body parts and that object. So another thing is that the pad also, like I mentioned, it secretes that fluid. So sometimes when you see frogs climb, especially if you have like a window facility or a window in your house, you will see these like little tracks kind of come down, which is kind of neat. So you can tell the tree frog has been there. All right. This is one of my favorite things about tree frogs is that they are able to freeze. And I put a popsicle on there because I always tell kids that they can freeze like a popsicle. So, sort of. So there's a very small number of frogs or anurans that can survive really low temperatures of winter by freezing about 65% of their bodily fluids. This sounds absolutely dangerous, but they are able to do it and they can come out of it just fine in the spring. One of those strategies is known as the accumulation of those cryoprotectants. So there's special like chemicals inside the body where they can freeze them, but it's almost like when you're in a car and your car has ice on the window and you put in the fluid that the windshield wiper fluid that kind of gets rid of that, but it doesn't freeze. It's very similar in that makeup. So Cope's gray tree frog is one of the few freeze-tolerant frogs that can mobilize glycerol as part of that cryoprotectant. So basically, it reduces that ice formation inside their vital organs. So accumulation of these cryoprotectants, it begins in the fall because they can't just turn it on and turn it off. It has to be a slow go. So in the fall, when they feel the light is getting less, the temperatures are getting cooler, they know fall and winter is coming. So they start accumulating these cryoprotectants inside their body. The two species, the Cope's gray tree frog and the gray tree frog, they actually produce different types of cryoprotectants. The gray tree frog has glycerol and glucose. However, the Cope's gray tree frog has only glucose. So it's very neat how they can do this. And then, like I said, they can withstand a temporary freezing event. So this would be like over a season or maybe a couple of years. One of the things that I think Dennis said is Dennis Ferraro said that he's done putting them in ice cube trays, and they've lived for about 3 years in there, and then they can come out. After those 3 years are up, it gets very difficult for that frog to kind of come out of that state. If you think about being frozen for 3 years, your body isn't going to work very well either. So if there's a very prolonged freezing event, it could be fatal, but a very temporary freezing event, like in a season, they're fine. Sometimes we've also had people find frozen frogs. Sometimes they will slip into a crevice or behind the bark. And if you pull bark off a tree, if there's a little space, sometimes people have found tree frogs in there frozen. I always tell people if you do find them, just leave them alone. They know what they're doing. Don't mess with them. All right, so that was a little bit just like their physicality and some of the physical attributes and traits that they have. One of the next things I want to talk about is kind of just their behavior. All right, so their range. Frogs in general are found on every continent except Antarctica. They're most diverse, however, in the tropics. That shouldn't be a surprise to any of us. The rainforest has a huge diversity, plant diversity, insect diversity, so they're going to have a lot of different types of tree frogs as well. About 30 species of Frogs will live in the US. There's about 600 that can be found in South and Central America. So it's a big difference. There's lots of tree frogs that are arboreal, which means tree living. However, there are non-arboreal tree frogs. So they don't have to live in the trees, even though they're called tree frogs. They can be found in lakes and ponds or in areas that have really moist ground cover. One of the things that rivers and swamps are always a great place, especially in kind of the southern United States. In summer, they'll spend a lot of their times up in the canopy of like deciduous forests or woods, especially like our Cope's gray tree frogs. They'll find different cracks and crevices, knot holes, pretty much anywhere where they can slip into a tree, at least here in Nebraska is where they're going to be. And then oftentimes scientists have found that tree frogs will return to the same cavity or the crevice or the crack. So they have an area that they continuously go home to or go back to. All right. Coast gray tree frogs in Nebraska, they're usually associated with grasslands and oak savannas. So these are going to be mostly southeast Nebraska. There are a few pockets of populations within the state, but the biggest portion of them, population of them, is going to be in that southeastern Nebraska. They are woodland dwellers. They live in small wood lots, in trees, among prairie streams, kind of large areas of just hardwood forests. They often rest with their heads protruding from an opening. So if you ever see them, they might be sitting in a tiny little crack. Their heads are going to be in there, be out, so they can see for danger and they can slip back in if they feel that they are unsafe. All right, they're also found in cities. A lot of people on farms, even in the like urban areas of the city, they have seen tree frogs on or near their house, other human-built structures. So they're kind of getting to be, I guess, adaptive to city environments. I remember one time we were doing a workshop at Pioneers Park and we found this, I think it was like a geranium plant. It was a non-native plant, an ornamental plant that was in a pot. And I was like, huh, that leaf looks weird. So I lifted it up and there were two tree frogs sitting on the bottom of the leaf. As long as they have water, they have food, they have a shelter, they can pretty much survive anywhere, and that includes cities and those human-built structures too. You can also find them resting among leaves. Not in years, that's supposed to say yards, I'm so sorry, or hiding in the nooks of farm buildings as well. They will often perch near porch lights at night. They can go hunt insects then that are attracted to that light. So they'll sit up, climb all with their sticky feet up where a porch light would be, and then insects that are coming over, it will grab those. So very smart animals. To do that as well. They also like birdhouses. They like decks, gutters, lots of windows. Like I mentioned, people will see them on their windows or stuck to their windows at night. All right, so what do they eat? So adult tree frogs are insectivores, so that means that they're only eating insects. As tadpoles, a lot of them are going to be herbivorous, so they're eating algae or they're eating something that's stuck inside the pond. A lot of them can be consumed by lots of different carnivorous animals, so they are food for lots of other animals, lots of mammals, birds, even some fish, other reptiles, all will eat tree frogs. Tree frogs, however, they like I mentioned, they're insectivores, so they're going to eat moths, small invertebrates, ants, crickets, beetles, flies, kind of the usual frog stuff. I mentioned earlier that frogs will swallow with their eyeballs. So one of the things is they have these protruding eyeballs for a reason. So when they eat something, if you've ever watched a frog or a toad eat, or even a salamander, they will like pop their eyes down into their head. So they eat something and they don't really have the same system that we do, the throat system, to be able to swallow. So what they will do is that they put something inside their mouth and then they like close their eyes. Their eyeball will literally sink into their head, push that food down into their stomach, and then they'll pop their eyes back up. So it's very interesting to watch them do this. So if you ever get to watch a frog do it, or if you Google search or YouTube or something, you can watch frogs swallow with their eyeballs. All right, so their development, they're depending on the water. So the word amphibian means two lives or double life. They spend part of their life in the water and part of their life on land. Most all amphibians have to have their eggs laid in water or some moist area because otherwise they're going to dry out. Same thing with adults. They have to continuously go back to the water or be in moist environments. That's why there's so many in the rainforest, is because it's a moist environment. Oftentimes when we see frogs, they're going to be very, very dependent on roadside ditches, water, lakes, ponds, wetlands, that kind of thing. Toads are a little different. You're going to find them out in the middle of a golf course or a pebble bunch of rocks. So they retain water a little bit better than frogs do. So they're going to be very different. So depending on the water level, and the water temperature and the species of frog, usually tadpoles hatch somewhere within 3 to 7 days. So the frogs will lay eggs. Those eggs will hatch into tadpoles in about 3 to 7 days, and then they will become froglets after the tadpoles. This metamorphosis process that transform in about 6 to 8 weeks. It all depends. But then you have the weird ones like bullfrogs who can actually stay tadpoles for a couple years if those environmental conditions aren't great. So if their pond is drying up and they're like, this is not a great time to be in here, they're going to metamorphosis. If they're like, man, there's a lot of water, there's a lot of food, I don't want to grow up right now. So they can stay, whatever is better for them environmentally to stay in that growth stage, they will do it. So that rate of growth, though, is dependent on the amount of food, the stress that are induced by predators, lots of different things. Also with reptiles, sometimes it's temperature that determines the sex. For frogs, it's all about the genetics, so very different. Reproduction, so here's frog eggs. So frogs are going to look like jelly eyeballs when you see them. They're normally active from late March through October. These are going to be your Cope's gray tree frogs. They will breed in April to about early July, sometimes even into August. The nighttime temperature for them to start reproducing needs to kind of be a constant about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. In Lincoln, we have not had that yet. I've heard frogs calling in Missouri as early as early March, but I have not heard many frogs. I think I heard a couple chorus frogs maybe last week, but we're starting just to get into that time, early April, where those temperatures are going to be a little bit more warm and a little bit more consistent. So during that time for them to call, the males will kind of gather at these things called breeding sites. And then basically those sites are going to be temporary wetlands, ponds, streams, flooded field edges, and they're just going to call. They're calling to the females to come find them. The males will sit kind of at the edge of the water, or they'll rest on a plant or a log that it's above the water so that the females can find them. Once they mate, females will produce about 900 to 3,000 eggs, depending on the species, depending on her size and the temperature and the food availability, everything. They're going to be these small, loose clumps. And like we mentioned, the eggs will hatch quickly. Once the newly transformed into froglets, they're usually these bright green colors. For the Cope's gray tree frog, they're going to have bright red tails. So if you ever see a froglet or a tadpole that have bright red tails, that is going to be a Cope's gray tree frog. So something different. It's very hard to identify tadpoles. I have a very hard time with it, but I do know what bullfrog tadpoles and I know what Cope's gray tree frog tadpoles look like. During the breeding season, females usually appear really heavy bodied. Males are going to look a lot thinner and they're going to have darker throats. Especially toads are going to change colors of their throats so that males and females can recognize each other. And then advertisement calls. Here we go. So although this species usually ends hibernation, when they come out of hibernation, they don't immediately start calling because they don't have those energy reserves. So basically they have to gather some energy to be able to call. So these warm, cloudy nights from about dusk to midnight are going to be the time that you're going to hear the most frogs call. Breeding season usually lasts about several weeks. It also depends of what's kind of happening in nature during that time. Sometimes they can even go all the way to June or July. It just depends on the weather and kind of just locally what's happening. So each frog species has a unique call. Gray tree frogs and corkscrew tree frogs are very similar, but they are differences. Females also know the difference. They are not going to waste their time on an animal that does not sound like their species. So they're able to find each other, even though there's going to be lots of different frogs calling at once. In general, the sound is like this really high-pitched trill. The eastern gray tree frog has a little slower trill than the Cope's gray tree frog, which is faster and a little bit higher pitched. And again, females know all this. They will not hybridize with each other. A lot of people have asked, do they hybridize with each other? The pitch and the pulse rate are going to be very different. This creates a barrier. So females are going to know that is not my species. I am looking for the one for me that is a Cope's gray tree frog. So they will not even approach a male that sounds different than it should. All right, so female choice dominates. So the males, they sit there and they call, the females get to approach them. They want the male that has the most prolonged and frequent calls. This means he has a lot of energy and will probably have good offspring. So that's what they're looking for. If a male detects a female's nearby, he will sometimes court her, entice her with something called a courtship call. This is a little bit longer and more like pretty and romantic sounding, I guess, to a frog than the normal advertising call. And then those successful calling results in amplexus, which is mating for frogs. So the male will mount the female. The female then, the male will release sperm to fertilize the eggs, and then she releases them into the pond. And then 3 to 7 days later, they will hatch into a tadpole. All right, so tree frogs and other frogs, just like birds, just like mammals, they're very territorial. So they have a unique call. They want the safety of the vegetation with those shallow breeding sites. They preferably like areas of tree branches that kind of overhang the water. So if you think about it, if a frog is calling, that's great. They're trying to find a female, but there's other animals that are also hearing this call. So it's a risk to call because you are exposing yourself to a predator, to another animal, but you're also, if you don't do it, you're not going to find a mate. There's these things called satellite males. These are usually the ones that are the first to a breeding season, but they kind of have a disadvantage because they do not call, they don't save their energy. They get there and they're like, yeah, let's call. And then by the time the female shows up, they're tired. So they don't really have enough stamina to go that long. But each female will only visit a breeding sites once per season to lay her egg. So if you as a male mess up, you lost your chance. Males will also really aggressively defend their territory. And then those satellite males that I talked about, they will wait kind of to hear to another male calling. So once they've exploded all of their energy, they have nothing left. So they'll kind of get up next to another male who's still calling. And then when he gets tired, they'll take over for a second when that female comes in, and the female doesn't know any better. And she'll be like, oh, you've been calling this whole time. I choose you. So they're kind of like these sneaky males that come in and kind of take the female at the last minute. All right, so that was kind of like a very interesting, small, short view of tree frogs in Nebraska, the Cope's gray tree frog. I want to talk a little bit about tree frogs around the world. So there's a ton of species. I just have a few. I'm sure most of us are familiar with them. This one's one of my favorite. I used to have a red-eyed tree frog. They're pretty big in the pet trade. You can find them at places like Petco or PetSmart. They're found in these neotropical regions of southern Mexico and even in Central America and South America. They have these very bright colors. They almost look like something out of a Dr. Seuss character. They have these orange feet. They're yellow and blue. They have purple on the back. They have these bright red eyes. So that's kind of just their distinctiveness. People know what these look like. They're breeding in these areas, these tropical regions. They're synchronized with the rainy season because if they don't, they will not have anywhere to lay their eggs. They need water to lay their eggs. So if they don't coincide it with the rain, they won't have that opportunity. So rainforests are going to be their preferred habitat. They also use something called startle coloration as a defense tactic. So when they're disturbed, they will flash these bright red bulging eyes and kind of show these like huge webbed orange feet. And it's supposed to kind of startle a predator. So if it's a snake or a bird or something, they're going to pause and be like, what is happening? And then all of a sudden the frog's going to spring to safety. So it kind of flashes this color to confuse the animal. And then when the animal's kind of confused, that frog then will hopefully hop away and be able to be safe. So here's a red-eyed tree frog, just a quick video here just to watch how they move. They have these like extremely long legs and they're so thin, but their feet look like catcher's mitts. They're just these weird, like unique animal, and I love how like synchronized their feet are, and how sticky they are. Also, did you guys see that he was climbing that cylindrical branch pretty well, and then he finally got onto the leaf, but he had a little hard time kind of sticking to it. So here's another really interesting species. This is called the glass frog. So these are arboreal frogs that live mostly in the trees. They are almost exclusively arboreal. What's neat about them is their background color is kind of a lime green, but their skin underneath is completely transparent. So that's how they get their name glass frog, because you can basically see right through them. So you can see their organs, their heart, their liver, their gastrointestinal tract. They're completely visible through their skin. These guys are also nocturnal, so not many people see them until they come out at night. They lay eggs in about 18 to 30 eggs, as far as their clutch. One of the neat things about them too is that they're mostly always in the tree. So how do they get their eggs into the water? Well, what they will do is the female will lay her eggs inside a little cup of a leaf or something like that that's wet because they're in the rainforest. And so they'll constantly be wet. And then when they hatch, they will just drop into the water. So she strategically lays her eggs in places that overhang the water so that when they hatch, they just drop right in. So no parental investment required of them. All right, here's a glass frog, just to kind of show you what they look like. I don't think the frog moves a lot, but just showing you that this animal is like completely transparent. You can see everything that's happening in here. It's very neat. Their feet are also very webbed in the back. If you remember that the red-eyed tree frog, they had more space between their feet. This one does not. All right, these guys are weird, but they're so cool. They're huge. If you ever go to the Omaha Zoo, they have some. They're called these giant monkey frogs. They're found in the Amazon basin in South America. They are usually found sitting in trees very far above the ground, in these warm tropical rainforests. They are also nocturnal, like many other frogs. They make nests out of leaves above the water. Very similar to the glass frog. So when they hatch, they drop in the water where they can feed and develop. They do produce a kind of poisonous substance which they spread onto their skin. So these guys, it tastes really bad to predators, so it reduces the chances of them being eaten. So they produce this on their skin and they kind of rub it everywhere. So if an animal eats them, they just taste really bad. These guys are carnivorous, like other frogs. They eat small insects, pretty much anything they can catch. And then the male will come out very, very late at night and call very loud. So they get their name because they're loud and they're in the trees, just kind of like a monkey. All right, and then this one, the last one we're going to talk about today, this one is a species in the United States called the barking tree frog. It is the largest tree frog species in the southeastern United States. Their coloration is kind of this pale green, kind of gray, bright green to dark brown. Their belly is white or kind of a yellowish color. They have these really thick muscular arms, and they have really extensive webbing on their feet. They also lay their eggs singly, which is different. Usually frogs lay them in clumps or clusters. These are laid kind of one at a time at the bottom of a pond. the reason they get their name tree frog or barking tree frog is because they make this like tonk tonk sound, which to people at the time when they named them, they thought it sounded like a distant barking dog. So you might see these if you ever go on, vacation or visit areas that are in those southeast United States. Florida is a great example if you ever want to see frogs. This is a great place that you can see them. So. And I believe that is it. So yeah, so that was our science of tree frogs. So it was hopefully interesting for a lot of you and you guys learned something. We're going to meet again in May 15th. We're going to be talking about lady beetles, which are ladybugs. It's a fancy word. We're going to talk about the differences between the invasive ones, the seven spotted, the six spotted, the colors, all of those things. So, and then I have the rest of the themes laid out for the rest of the year. And then if you are familiar with Science of, we have a ton of videos. So if you want more resources, we have a ton of them on our Nebraska Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. We also have a really active Facebook and Instagram. So like us, you can learn events and kind of fun facts that are happening. And then we have our Nebraska Wildlife Education website as well. And then I believe that is it. So I'm going to check to see if we have I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna check to see if we have any comments or question. Someone asked, did I say the Cope's gray tree frog can prolong their tadpole stage? Sorry, it was a bullfrog that can do that. So bullfrogs are ones that can, I just saw something today. I know they can at least do it for 2 seasons, but I thought someone else said that they can do more. It just depends on those environmental conditions. And it makes bullfrogs even more prolific because they eat everything and they're huge tadpoles and they take over areas and they can last forever. So it's almost like, what's wrong with you? Nothing. Someone asked, are copes nocturnal? Yes. So most Cope's gray tree frogs are going to be most active during the nighttime. That's when they're making their calls. That's when you'll mostly see them. But if you see one during the day, it doesn't mean that they're sick or they're weird. It just maybe they were disturbed or maybe they're hot or something like that. So yes, but mostly they're going to be active during the nighttime. So, all right, good questions. I don't see any more, so I'll go ahead and let you guys go. This is a little bit longer one than normal. But we will see you on May 15th for Lady Beetles. Someone just asked, what is the biggest difference between frogs and toads? Biggest difference is there's two big differences. Their skin is one of them. Frogs are going to have a little bit more smooth, moist skin. Frogs are going to be a little more warty and dry. Also, just their body stature. So frogs are usually a bit more petite, long-limbed. Frogs are like short, squatty. I always think of like a bulldog, like a bulldog versus like a greyhound. So very different. That's kind of the main thing. Also, the way that they move. Frogs make longer distance jumps. Toads are a little bit more hoppy and small and short. Those are kind of the big difference. So. Someone asked, their skin absorbs all over toads through their stomach. Their skin absorb all over toads through their stomach. Not sure what you're asking. They do absorb through their skin. A lot of people complain that frogs and toads pee on you when you pick them up. It's just them releasing water. It's like, hey, leave me alone. I'm going to release all my water on you, and usually you drop me. But just like all other amphibians, they do breathe through their skin. So make sure that if you ever touch amphibians, you don't have like hand sanitizer on, you don't have lotions, kind of things like that. So. No. The difference between toads and land frogs, toads only through their tummy. Nope, they should be the same for both frogs and toads. They breathe the same way. And same with caecilians and same within a salamander. So usually all amphibians will breathe through their skin. So when we touch them, we just want to make sure that we're careful not to clog their pores and to clog their skin as well. So. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go. If you have any questions, I will send out an email. You're welcome to ask me more questions. Otherwise, I'll send an email with some resources to everybody with the registrations for next time as well. So thank you, everyone. Thanks.